My name is Clara Thompson. I am 77 years old, and the last clear memory I have of that morning was my son saying, "Mom, just sit here for a few minutes. We'll come back after check-in." His wife nodded, her eyes already darting toward the departure board. So I sat, like an obedient piece of luggage, on one of those stiff leather chairs in the airport lounge. At first, I believed them. Because why wouldn't I? Families travel together, don't they? They don't abandon their mother like an umbrella you forget in a cab. But as the minutes stretched into hours, I began to notice the way people around me kept moving. Families hauling strollers, businessmen rolling briefcases, children tugging on sleeves, and yet no one came back for me. By the second hour, my coffee had gone cold, and so had the certainty that I still belonged to them. Doubt crept in like a draft under a door. By the fifth, I was angry at Dylan for thinking he could handle me like a package, angry at Marissa for the way she smiled too sweetly when she wanted me out of the picture. By the eighth, I knew the truth. The plane was gone, carrying them to Hawaii. And I was still sitting there with my purse clutched in my lap like a fool. I remember standing up, my legs stiff, my chest burning with something hotter than shame. People brushed past me, none of them knowing that an old woman had just been cut loose from her family. I walked toward the ticket counter, my heart thudding not with fear but with an odd exhilaration. If they didn't want me, maybe I didn't have to keep wanting them. When the woman behind the counter asked where I was headed, the words surprised even me. Portland. One way. Please. My voice trembled, but not from weakness. It was the sound of a life splitting in two, the part that was over, and the part I was about to claim. The plane to Portland left in the late afternoon, and I boarded with nothing more than my purse. A paperback I had already read twice, and the jacket I had carried for years but rarely needed. The seat beside me stayed empty, which felt like both an insult and a gift. I didn't cry, though the thought tempted me once or twice when the flight attendant asked if I wanted water. I simply said, "Yes, thank you," and forced myself to sip as though I were on my way to visit an old friend instead of fleeing my own family. When we landed, the sky over Oregon was low and gray, the kind of sky that presses down on you and yet feels honest. The taxi line was short, and I climbed into the back seat of a car that smelled faintly of pine-scented cleaner. The driver asked, "Where to, ma'am?" And for a second my throat locked. I had no address, no plan, nothing but the wild certainty that anywhere was better than where I had been. "I need a place that rents by the week," I said finally, my voice steadier than I expected. He nodded, as if he'd heard stranger requests, and drove me into a neighborhood of small houses with peeling paint and sagging porches. We stopped at a narrow Victorian with a sign taped to the window, "Room for rent. Weekly. Cash." It was exactly the kind of place I might have warned my students about years ago when I was still teaching, but tonight it looked like salvation. Evelyn Grant answered the door in a faded cardigan, her eyes sharp as glass. She looked me up and down, not unkindly, just measuring. "Cash?" she asked. "Yes," I said, and held out the bills I had folded so tightly they were warm from my hand. The room smelled of cedar and mothballs, with a single bed pushed against the wall and a dresser scarred from years of use. I set my purse on the chair and sat down, my legs trembling not from weakness but from the sheer strangeness of being untethered for the first time in decades. No one was waiting for me. No one expecting me to cook or to keep quiet or to follow along. That night, I lay awake listening to the rain on the roof, my heart racing between terror and relief. I whispered into the darkness, "This is mine now. Morning light slipped through the thin curtains, pale and uncertain, and I realized I had survived my first night alone. The bed creaked when I swung my legs over the side, and for a moment I just sat there, staring at the worn rug beneath my feet. It felt strange, almost ceremonial, like I was standing at the edge of a stage and deciding whether to step into the spotlight or retreat backstage. Evelyn knocked on the door around 8, holding a chipped mug of coffee. "This isn't a hotel," she warned me, her voice brisk. "You make your own bed, and the laundry room's in the basement. But if you need groceries, there's a market 2 blocks over." She left the mug on the dresser and shuffled away before I could thank her. Her bluntness might have stung once, but today I found it refreshing. No false politeness, no pretending, just terms, clear and simple. I drank the bitter coffee and felt more awake than I had in years. By mid-morning, the room was too small to hold me. I slipped on my jacket, folded my old paperback into my purse, and stepped out into the drizzle. The air smelled of wet asphalt and bakery yeast drifting from somewhere down the block. People hurried past with umbrellas, purposeful and anonymous. For once, anonymity felt like protection. No one here knew me as Dylan's mother or Marissa's unwanted shadow. Still, money sat heavy in my mind. I had enough cash for a few weeks, maybe a month, but not much more. I couldn't drift. I needed structure, a rhythm, something to keep my hands busy and my thoughts from circling back to the betrayal at the airport. I paused outside a small cafe with fogged windows and a faded sign that read, "Morning Brew." Through the glass, I saw a woman wiping down tables with the efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Customers lined the counter, leaving coins and bills in a tip jar. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. My heart pounded as I pushed open the door, the bell above jangling. For the first time in decades, I wasn't entering a place as someone's mother or someone's burden. I was entering as Clara, a woman who still had something to offer. The smell of strong coffee and buttered toast wrapped around me as I stepped inside. Behind the counter, a woman in her 50s with sharp shoulders and a tighter bun than any teacher I had ever known looked up. Her eyes narrowed as if measuring my worth in the few seconds it took me to cross the room. "You looking for something?" she asked, her voice quick and no nonsense. "A job," I said, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. "I can work mornings. I'm reliable." For a beat, she just stared, rag in hand. Then she shrugged. "Name's Maggie O'Connell. I need someone who shows up at 6, keeps the tables clean, and doesn't whine about sore feet. Cash at the end of the week. Interested?" "Yes," I said before I had the chance to talk myself out of it. That was how I began. The first shift started the very next morning. Before the sun was fully up, Maggie handed me a rag and pointed to the tables. "Wipe, refill the sugar, smile if you can manage. Coffee's free for staff, but don't loiter." By 7, the place buzzed with regulars, men in work boots, women in scrubs, students with earbuds. They left behind crumbs and coffee rings, and I moved among them with my rag and my careful smile. My body ached, but in a way that felt earned, not imposed. When a young man left a crumpled dollar on the table, Maggie nodded toward it. "That's yours. Tips are yours to keep." I picked it up slowly, as if it might vanish. The paper was damp from his cup, but in my hand it felt like something solid, something mine. I tucked it into my pocket, and for the first time in years, I felt the simple pride of being paid for my effort. That night, I pressed the bill flat on the dresser in my room and stared at it until sleep came. $1 wasn't much, but it was the first brick in the foundation of a new life. By the end of the week, my feet were blistered, but my spirit felt steadier than it had in years. Each shift at the cafe taught me something simple but important. I could still be useful, still belong somewhere. Maggie never wasted words, but one morning she grunted. Not bad, as I stacked cups without being told. That two-word approval warmed me more than any of her free coffees. On Saturday, I stopped at a thrift store a few blocks from the cafe. Rows of jackets hung like soldiers at attention, most too big or too bright. Then I saw it, a navy coat, wool, with large buttons and deep pockets. The fabric was worn at the cuffs, but the shoulders sat just right when I slipped it on. For $30, I bought not just a coat, but a kind of armor. When I walked back to Evelyn's house wearing it, she gave me a sharp little nod, as if to say, "Good choice." That evening, Evelyn mentioned a neighborhood potluck. "Bring something or don't bother showing up," she said, thrusting a flyer at me. I hadn't baked in years, but muscle memory guided my hands as I peeled apples and worked butter into flour. The kitchen smelled like autumn, and when the pie came out of the oven, golden and bubbling, I almost cried from the simple act of making something with love again. The potluck was held in the basement of a nearby church. Long tables sagged under casseroles and crock-pots, the air warm with chatter. I set my pie down shyly, half expecting it to sit untouched. But within minutes, a man in a flannel shirt took a slice and smiled. "Best crust I've had in ages," he said. His name was Walter Harris, and he told me he came every month just for the company. I didn't know then that Walter would become a friend, steady and respectful, never pressing for more than I could give. All I knew was that, as laughter echoed off the basement walls and my pie disappeared slice by slice, I felt something stir inside me. Belonging. For the first time since the airport, I wasn't just surviving, I was beginning to live. It was a Tuesday night when my phone buzzed with a number I almost didn't recognize. For a second, I thought about letting it ring out. Too many years of being summoned only when convenient had made me wary. But then I saw the name. Ethan. My grandson. "Grandma, are you okay?" His voice cracked in that way only a 16-year-old's can, hovering between boy and man. I swallowed hard. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Better than fine. Actually." There was a long silence, then a shaky breath. "Dad and Mom keep saying you wandered off, that you weren't thinking clearly." But I knew that wasn't true. I knew you wouldn't just disappear. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the navy coat draped over the chair. "You're right. I didn't disappear. I just chose a different road." His laugh was soft, almost relieved. "I knew it. Where are you?" "In a safe place, but don't tell them. Promise me, Ethan. If you ever want to see me, you come alone. No tricks." "I promise," he said quickly, almost fiercely. We talked for nearly an hour about his classes, his part-time job bagging groceries, the guitar he was teaching himself to play. When he asked about me, I told him about the cafe, about Evelyn's sharp wit, even about the pie at the potluck. He laughed, said he wished he could have tried it. After we hung up, I sat there in the dim light, my chest tight with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Dylan and Marissa might have turned me into a ghost in their story, but Ethan still saw me as flesh and blood. Over the next few weeks, he sent short messages, a picture of his dog, a joke about school lunch, a blurry photo of the sunset from his bike. Each one was a reminder that I wasn't invisible, not to everyone. One night, after a particularly long shift, I opened my phone to see his message. "Proud of you. Grandma." Just 4 words, but they landed heavier than any suitcase I had carried in my life. I first heard about the newspaper article from Evelyn, who slapped it down on the kitchen table one rainy morning. The headline read, "Elderly woman missing, family desperate for answers." Underneath was a picture of me from 2 Christmases ago, holding a mug of cocoa, looking every bit the kindly grandmother they wanted the world to mourn. Desperate? Evelyn scoffed. Looks to me like they're desperate for attention. My stomach twisted as I read the quotes. Dylan's words were polished, carefully chosen. We just want Mom home. We're so worried about her safety. And Marissa, her eyes wide in the accompanying photo, said she was heartbroken and terrified. It was theater, all of it. A week later, the knock came. A man in a gray suit introduced himself as an attorney representing my family. He spoke with professional sympathy, asking about my well-being, suggesting a medical evaluation, hinting at power of attorney forms that would protect me. I let him finish his polished speech before I answered. I appreciate your concern, I said, my voice steady. But I am of sound mind. I work, I pay my rent, and I make my own choices. If Dylan and Marissa are worried, they can write me directly. Until then, I don't want to be contacted through lawyers. His eyebrows lifted slightly, maybe surprised by my clarity. I handed him a short letter I had prepared after visiting the local legal aid office. In it, I affirmed my independence, my financial control, and my wish to sever any unwanted guardianship claims. Please give this to them, I said, closing the door gently but firmly behind him. That evening, I lit a match and held it to the corner of a letter Dylan had sent earlier, one filled with guilt-tripping and half-truths. The flames curled the paper into blackened lace, and I felt a strange peace as the ashes drifted into the sink. They had turned me into a ghost in the public eye, but I was alive, more alive than I had been in years, and I would not let them write the ending of my story. I was wiping down a table at the cafe one gray morning when the bell above the door chimed, and I looked up to see Marissa standing there. She wore her sharpest coat, her hair smoothed into place, but the tension in her jaw gave her away. Customers glanced at her as she strode across the floor, heels clicking like a metronome of disapproval. "Clara," she said, her voice low but edged. "We need to talk." Maggie raised an eyebrow from behind the counter, but I shook my head. This was my conversation to finish. We stepped outside into the drizzle. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Marissa's mask slipped just enough for the truth to leak out. "I can't live with your shadow in my house. Every time I turn around, Dylan compares me to you, your cooking, your patience, your presence. I don't want to fight a ghost in my own marriage." Her confession should have stung, but instead it felt like clarity. She'd never wanted me gone for my sake. She wanted me gone for hers. "You could have told me that," I said quietly. "Instead, you left me in a lounge like forgotten luggage." Her lips tightened. "You belong with family, Clara, with Dylan." I took a slow breath, the drizzle cooling my face. Family isn't supposed to chain you, Marissa. It's supposed to love you. If Dylan truly wanted me home, he would be here himself, not hiding behind you or lawyers. For once, she had no quick retort. The silence between us stretched, heavy with all the things we would never fix. Finally, she shook her head. "You've changed." "No," I said, feeling the truth settle into my bones. "I've stopped pretending." I turned back toward the cafe, the bell jangling softly as I stepped inside. Through the window, I watched her linger on the sidewalk, her figure blurred by rain, until she finally walked away. It wasn't triumph I felt, it was release. The fight was over, not because I had won, but because I had chosen to stop playing their game. The weeks after Marissa's visit unfolded with an unexpected gentleness, as if life itself wanted to acknowledge the line I had drawn and reward me for not stepping back over it. My mornings at the cafe became second nature. 6 o'clock came early, but I found myself looking forward to the clatter of cups, the hiss of the espresso machine, and Maggie's sharp voice cutting through the fog of dawn. She never softened much, but she trusted me now, trusted that I would show up, keep the place tidy, and handle the small chaos of customers with steady hands. Sometimes, when she thought no one was listening, she hummed under her breath while polishing silverware, and I liked to imagine that I had become part of her rhythm, a steady note in her song. At Evelyn's, life was simpler than I had ever known it could be. She remained blunt, but her bluntness felt like honesty rather than hostility. One evening she knocked on my door carrying a dish of stew. "Too much for me," she said, though I noticed she had brought 2 spoons. We sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, steam rising between us, and for once she didn't pepper me with practical advice. Instead, she asked, "You happy here?" Her question startled me, but the answer rose easily. "Yes," I said. "I think I am." She gave a short nod, as if my happiness was a puzzle piece she had been waiting to see fall into place. Walter remained a steady presence too. At the next potluck, he arrived with a bag of apples and a sheepish grin, asking if I might show him how to master pie crust. We worked side by side in the church kitchen, his large hands clumsy with the dough, mine guiding without taking over. Laughter bubbled up in me more than once, surprising in its lightness. We weren't anything beyond companions, but there was comfort in knowing someone wanted my company simply for the sake of it. And then there was Ethan, true to his promise. He came alone one Saturday afternoon, taller than the boy I had last hugged, his voice deeper, but his eyes still kind. We sat in the corner booth at the cafe, his knees nearly hitting the underside of the table, while I listened to him talk about school, friends, and the way he hated how his parents spoke about me as if I were a ghost. I listened intently, memorizing every change in his expression, every gesture that reminded me of Dylan before life hardened him. "Grandma," he said, lowering his voice, "I'm glad you didn't let them decide for you. I'm glad you're you." When he hugged me before leaving, his arms tight around my shoulders, I felt love in its purest form, not love that demands or manipulates, but love that exists freely, without strings. That night, back in my little room, I pulled out a sheet of paper. I wasn't writing to Dylan or Marissa, or even to Ethan. This letter was for me. My hand trembled slightly as I began, but the words came sure and steady. "Clara, you are not missing. You are not abandoned. You are free. You are not rebuilding what was lost. You are building anew. This life, however messy or small, belongs wholly to you." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the pocket of my navy coat. When I looked at myself in the mirror above the dresser, I no longer saw the woman slumped in an airport lounge, waiting for someone who would never come back. I saw a woman alive, present, and finally, entirely her own. Outside, the rain began to fall again, soft against the windows, steady as a heartbeat, and for the first time in many years, I was not afraid of tomorrow. I was ready for it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.